Thank you for the invitation to participate today. Delighted to be here. I'm joined today by three amazing panelists. We have Leslie Johnson, who's the CEO of the Louders Foundation. We have Days Agahi, who is a climate justice activist, and Mar Sorrow, who is Group Head of Sustainability at Bupa. And what we would like to do today is to draw on some work that we've been running at Forum for the Future to look at the future of sustainability. So what is it that we can learn from the past to inform what happens next? And we're actually replicating a live conversation that we had a month or so ago. We're just bringing this online and hopefully being able to, as a result, reach a wider audience. I think there is an opportunity to put Q&A. So I can't see the Q&A button right now, but I guess it will appear, or something will appear in the chat. But I do hope as you hear the conversation unfold, you post questions into the relevant place, and somehow, by some magic, I'll get to see them and I can pose them to our panelists. So what we'd like to do today is just to reflect on a 6-month campaign that we have been running here at Forum called The Future of Sustainability. This is an annual piece of work that we undertake and usually takes the form of a report on the trends that we are seeing. How does that inform what might need to happen next? But last year, when the campaign started, which was in November, that also coincided with us hitting 25 years old. And as a sustainability nonprofit, we wanted to use that 25-year mark to really take a long, hard look at what have we achieved as an organization? What have we achieved as a sustainability movement over the last couple of decades? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What does that tell us for what might need to come next? And as part of the campaign, we interviewed a whole array of individuals, and they include historians, they include professionals from well-known people within the sustainability movement, people from business, from government, from philanthropy. And we were really just asking what has worked, why has it worked, what hasn't worked? And it really uncovered a few things that might just be holding us back at this moment in time. And some of these perhaps aren't so familiar: short-termism, vested interests, lukewarm vanilla flavors of CSR, a number of things that might be what might be holding us back, then we need to ask what might we need to do differently going forward. And so to conclude the campaign, I wrote a blog where I just had a big dream about what is it that we can do differently going forward. And I think some of this big dream is really relevant to this moment in time, because we are at a crossroads. We know that the science around our climate challenges is getting ever starker. We have failed to address the root causes of inequality. All of the systems that we rely on, from our food system to our energy system to our health system, they're fragile, they're brittle. We're seeing splintering around geopolitical lines, which is clearly why we're all here today, to raise awareness and to support our colleagues in the Ukraine. And so at this crossroads in time, what is it then that we might need to do differently? And I think there are a number of things that we could do differently. We do need to see the world, I think, as interconnected systems and use that understanding to really design for transformational change. We need to work together within the sustainability profession, across different professions, across entire systems. And we need to draw on the energy and innovation at the niche. We know at the niche of our system, all sorts of possibilities are there for a sustainable future. We need to bring those into the mainstream. And we need to face up to tough choices. This isn't an easy journey. We don't have all of the answers. And I think probably what I have reflected is the big thing we perhaps need to do differently is to recognize the importance of mindsets, the narratives that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves. And actually, we've done a lot of work at Forum on what is a just and regenerative mindset as a way of unlocking our progress towards a sustainable future. And just simply taking a different mindset, seeing potential where we tend to see problems, recognizing the interconnectivity of the world around us, rapidly responding to how we deal with the planetary crisis, respecting human rights universally, genuinely participating in democratic processes where we're bringing in whole voices across the system. These are all things we can do differently that mean that then actually we might stand a greater chance of delivering transformational change. So lots to do differently as we go forward, but to try and make that a little bit more granular, I'm going to ask each of my three panelists in turn for their big dream. They all have a different perspective, but also recognize the interconnectivity of the systems around us. And so I'm going to go first to Ma. Ma, what is it that business needs to do differently?
Thank you, Sally. It's such an honor to be here supporting such an important cause, and an enormous privilege to be joining these wonderful women to discuss this relevant topic. So very quickly, just to say that, Bupa is an international healthcare company serving 38 million customers and employing 84,000 people in many countries. And we have no shareholders, which means that we reinvest all our profits into the benefit for current and future customers. And as Sally, as you pointed out, we are at the crossroad, and the climate crisis is just not an environmental crisis; it's an economic, human crisis, and it threatens all the systems that underpin our society and our economy: the food system, the health system, the infrastructure system, to name a few. So, as you were saying, I really agree that we need serious system change and deep, urgent transformation to address this. And in this context, businesses have a big role to play, because we cannot thrive in societies that fail. And if we bring that to the issue that we're supporting today, the war in Ukraine, I think that businesses more than ever need to take an active stance. We cannot longer pretend that issues like this, like the war in Ukraine or climate change, have nothing to do with us. So all across Bupa, we're really shocked and devastated by the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we're doing everything we can to support those who are affected. So just like a couple of examples. So we just we've put together a package for practical support, which is being delivered by a business in Poland, LuxMed, and teams in Poland are treating over 1,000 refugees patients every day. And we're also working to ensure that UK doctors and nurses, Ukraine doctors and nurses gain the necessary certifications to be able to deliver care in Poland. And we've set up in Warsaw, an inpatient hospital and outpatient clinic to provide free healthcare for Ukrainians. And so, as many other businesses, we're just taking that biggest stance. I think that that's the main thing that we need to do differently. And Bupa, like many other businesses, we really recognize this. And in this context, over a year ago, our CEO, who was recently appointed back then, he sent two clear messages to really demonstrate this direction of travel. He refreshed our purpose as a company to helping people live longer, healthier, happier lives and making a better world. So he added that, and making a better world, to really demonstrate that a bigger role that we wanted to play in society. And he also included sustainability as one of the key pillars of the new corporate strategy. And he was just basically saying that for 75 years, we've been looking after people's health. And in today's world, we cannot do this anymore if we're not also addressing the causes which are harming the health of the planet, because the interconnections between the two. So, because basically we cannot have healthy people in an unhealthy planet. So over the past year, we've been just working on our new sustainability strategy, which is focused on this intersection between people and planet health. And it demonstrates the ways in which we are making a better world for our colleagues, customers, communities, and wider society. And through this, what we really want to do is build a world with three characteristics. The first one, a future where the best healthcare delivers benefits for both people and planet. So we are part of the healthcare sector. So 4.4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions comes from the healthcare sector. So first and foremost, we really need to drive to cut, just work on driving that down, and need to start with our own area of influence. And we have big ambitions to become a net zero business by 2040, underpinned by 1.5 degrees science-based targets. But these are only ambitions. So businesses, we need to start demonstrating more action. And that's what we're going to be trying to do. We've already started, but it's going to be a big journey. Second, we really also want to build a future where we innovate to find real solutions to the biggest sustainability challenges around healthcare. And that's going back to your point, Sally. Innovation is really key, and this is because it goes beyond us. We know that we cannot do this on our own. And the third one is we want to build a future where people become healthier as the planet does. So this pillar really reflects our aspirations to become a truly regenerative business, protecting, restoring, and regenerating the environment in which we live, and then bring it back to health, to the health of the people. And this is only just very much focused on environmental elements, but this is underpinned by strong foundations on social and governance as well. So, and last point I would make is that at the heart of all this is collaboration, radical collaboration. We really need to be working together with others. And a very tangible example of this work is some of the work that we're doing with you, Sally, with Forum and other companies such as Wilgreens Wood Alliance, Reckitt, and GSK Consumer Healthcare. We formed the Climate and Health Coalition, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative with a mission to really mobilize and equip the private sector to play a key role in accelerating the integrated transformation that needs to happen in our climate and health systems to drive benefits for both people and planet. So this is being part of this coalition. It's just bringing a lot of really good things for Bupa, because where it's helping us accelerate our own transformation, but also at the same time unlocking the wider role of the private sector. So just to summarize, Sally, you asked me what businesses need to do differently. So businesses more than ever have the responsibility, but also the opportunity to play a broader role in society. And business need to push the systems around them to truly deliver that urgent transformation that is required given these current circumstances in which we're living in. So at Bupa, we really, like many other businesses, we're really ready to embrace this challenge and working with other businesses, philanthropy, civil society, and others to really work to build a healthier future for people and planet. It's not going to be easy, as you said. I think we just don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers, but we're really, really keen to embrace the challenge. So thank you.
Thank you, Mar. I've actually got a follow-up question, if I may, and there is a question on the live stream, which I think is super relevant to what you've just shared. My first question is, recognizing what you've just said, which is really important. We don't have all the answers right now. The path that we're treading hasn't been trodden before because we're trying to drive deep systemic transformational change. How do you go about convincing your managers, the more senior people in the organization, to come with you on a journey where the path hasn't been well trodden and you don't have all the answers? And I ask because I hear many corporates say, well, we're only going to publish our goals when we have all the answers. And honestly, I think that has slowed us down enormously because it doesn't then stimulate innovation. But as someone that has convinced her board to go with her on this journey where you don't have the answers, how did you do it?
Well, it's been a journey, and especially because at Bupa we've been really risk averse for many years, I would say. So I think that it's been a huge mindset shift, as you were saying, and we had we were lucky that our CEO was really convinced and really set the tone, and that helps a lot. But then there's a big gap between the CEO and everyone else that needs to come on board with us to really make it happen. So that was a good thing. But what we've done, and we haven't cracked that yet, but it's what we found really helpful has been obviously bring the evidence and what other businesses are doing and so on, but also partnering with others and bringing that fresh perspective, such as working with you, Sally, from Forum. That's that always bring that expert voice. It's been really, really, really credible way of making sure that that people understand. And then it's also all about stories, as you were saying. I think just we really have the health element of all this. It's the DNA of who we are. So just trying to bring the science and just being really clear that we cannot continue to do what we're doing. It's not because we want to save the world that we really want to make a positive impact, but it's about our business. And I think that that's where people really realize, okay, yes, now I get it. It's just bringing it back to business, but it's a constant dialogue. I mean, we were just starting the journey. So yeah, but few thoughts there.
Great. So I think that's super helpful. And one of the important things you said is mindset, and shifting from a mindset of requiring all of the answers to actually, embracing this deep ambition. And there is a question on the live stream, which I'll come to Leslie in a moment, but it's very relevant, I think, to what you've just said, Mar. So thank you, Dan, for this question. And if you are listening in, please pose more questions. I've now figured out how to do it, so it's all good. I'll be able to see your questions. But Dan is talking about the fact that I and others have made him a big proponent even of the importance of evolving to a just and regenerative mindset. And I know that Mar at Bupa, we've had sessions on shifting mindsets. How can we reinforce the importance of mindset to business, and really make the point it's not just consultant speak? Actually, it's fundamental to driving that deep transformation. And again, maybe share how this has worked at Bupa, because we have had a conversation with senior leaders about shifting mindset. So what were the enabling conditions that really allowed that to happen?
Yeah, so I think it's lots of conversations. I mean, it's just numerous. Just find what we found really helpful is to craft that narrative, get the expert voices, and then start the conversations, and not only with the people who are with you, but bringing into the conversation the divergent voices to really have open and continuous conversations about it. I think that that's been been really, really important. And also knowing who are the key people within the organization who are able to mobilize others. I think that finding those allies and bringing them on board to then really try to bring the rest of the organization. I think that that's also been really, really helpful. And I think that I would say that this topic is just most people they're very engaged at the beginning, but then when they really understand that they're going to need to do things differently, it's when the trickiest bit happens, because it's like, okay, yeah, everyone agrees with, that we need to reduce our carbon footprint. But, when you're telling them, oh no, but now you need to do this differently, is when things become a little bit, more difficult.
Okay. So there's something there about using a range of tactics which come from the importance of shifting narratives, bringing in divergent voices, bringing in experts. That all helps to shift mindsets. And this is something we've explored a lot in our business transformation compass. And I guess sort of my build on the answer to the question would be where you can point to how just by shifting your mindset, what you do changes. And so within the business transformation compass, which anyone can download from our website, it talks about how if you shift to a more just and regenerative mindset, so see the world as interconnected systems, see potential and so on, then actually, even if you're at the start of your sustainability journey, you'll start to do things differently because you'll recognize the urgency of, for example, the climate challenge. So I think lots we can do there. And I often say to businesses in particular, well, what's the worst that can happen if we shift our mindset? we might just do something slightly better. That's probably better than not doing anything at all. So it gets us on the right path potentially. So brilliant. So we've got some insights there about what we need to do differently from business, understand the role in shifting systems, shifting mindsets, being ambitious. I love how Bupa has linked human health with climate health. They are completely intersectional issues, and you're trying to drive co-benefits for both, and through the Climate and Health Coalition, unlock the role of the private sector to drive deep systemic change in both climate and with health. So a few things that we can point to there in terms of what we might want to see from business going forward, different things. But let's now turn to another key actor in our complex ecosystem around us. Leslie, as CEO of the Louders Foundation, someone that's been very active in philanthropy for several years now, running a foundation with a very big ambition. What does philanthropy need to do differently?
Oh, that's a big question. And actually, it's a big question for a very small actor, because when you look at philanthropy and how big philanthropy is, it's tiny. I mean, when we look at the climate crisis and the need to decarbonize our infrastructure, you need 90 trillion for that. Total philanthropic giving over the past couple of years has averaged about 750 billion. So we're talking about taking a very tiny source of funding and trying to be catalytic with it. And I think when I look to what we're trying to do, I mean, at Louders Foundation, we're only 2.5 years old. We were set up really to look at how can we use this tiny but catalytic funding to try to tackle what we see as this dual crisis of climate and inequality, and do that with and through business. So it's super inspiring to follow Mar and hear about how a business like Bupa is really walking the talk, but not everyone does that. So we really are trying to inspire and challenge business to do good. So to your question, how can philanthropy change and tackle this? I think we actually need some changes in how philanthropy works, first of all. I think first, if we assume philanthropy is very small, and it is, but at the same time it's growing, we're seeing some mega funders coming on the scene, and some would say the lack of transparency in how philanthropy works is an issue. There's a big source of funding that's coming into entities that maybe are not accountable to themselves, or even worse, to society, for creating impact. So I think philanthropy needs to be more accountable. We're all in this together and really very much focused on the results that we want to have. But I think also philanthropy needs to be bigger and bolder. I mean, I mentioned the 750 billion number. If you look at that total giving, only 2% of that is going into climate action. And that's really scary, given that we're in a crisis situation. Time is ticking on this decisive decade, as they call it. We have 7.5 years left. It's time to step up. So it is time to step up to be bigger, but it's also time to step up to be bolder. I think what's exciting about philanthropy when we look at the future of sustainability is philanthropy can take risks, and philanthropy can think long term. Philanthropy can bring unlikely allies together in a room. We are, for example, funding an initiative called the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is where a bunch of countries have come together to make commitments to how they're going to decarbonize, and the just transition that needs to be part of that. So there's a really important role for philanthropy to come in and fund when no one else will fund, but it doesn't always do that. And I think sometimes philanthropy has become sometimes too risk averse and not really playing the role it should play. And I think finally, Mar talked about collaboration, and I think collaboration is absolutely critical. I mentioned how philanthropy can bring sort of unlikely folks together. We've been doing that in the fashion industry, where we're really trying to bring brands around the table to embrace pre-competitive collaboration around innovation. And that's something we've been doing with Fashion for Good, as an example, for those that have heard about that. But philanthropic entities are not very collaborative themselves. And there's still a lot of, I wouldn't say competition, but I think maybe a lot of ego in the industry, where we all have our own theories of change, our own theses. And, I don't want to fund his theory because I have my own theory. That's silly. We don't have time for that, and we are seeing more and more donor collaboratives. We're part of many of them. And I love the fact that these things are flowering. But I think also we can't collaborate and then have what we do together sink to the lowest common denominator. It's really important that we still retain that kind of risk-taking, bold and brave approach that I think philanthropy should have. And I think finally, and I saw in the chat that we're talking about systems change at the end of the day. So, Sally, you framed it well when you're talking about mindset shift. Mindset shift is one of the many things that needs to happen when you're trying to change a system. You also need to change the rules. You need to change the power dynamics. Ultimately, if you go back to the work of Donatella Meadows, you really have to change this overall paradigm in our global economic system. Philanthropy can play a role because it has that longer term view. It doesn't always act that way, but I think when you're talking about changing a system, you need to change the ideas and the incentives in that system. And that's where I think philanthropy could play a bigger role and invest for the long term to try to shift our view of what an inclusive economy could look like. And this tragic crisis of Ukraine has made our job harder. The system is changing. We're in a totally different geopolitical, macroeconomic, we're coming into stagflation. And this is the time when I think we collectively with business, with finance, with policymakers should be questioning what's the system we want and get away from these issues we've been facing with the past system we've been living under.
Brilliant. So what strikes me is that, listening to you in terms of what you would like to see philanthropy do differently, there are some common themes with what Mar was saying. So be bolder in that point of view, take more risk. If you're executing on a business strategy where you don't have all the answers, that can be quite risky, but we absolutely need that to be the case. Then thinking long term, you both talked about collaboration. And Mar didn't talk about this, but I do see this very much in philanthropy at the moment, which is, the emperor's new clothes. My theory of change is better than your theory of change. And it's a real barrier to that collaboration. So how do we lose egos more effectively? And then I love that you've ended up with that $1 million question, which is, what is the system that we want? And actually, I think we know that. So there's also something here about being much clearer that the current systems that we rely on, they're broken. We hear people say the health system is broken, the food system is broken. And I know I say this a lot, but it's worth repeating. These systems are not broken. They are working really well to the current goal of the system. And the economy at the moment equally isn't broken. It's working to the goal of short-termism, profit generation for the few. And what we really need to see happen is a rewiring of the goals of our economy to be just and regenerative, to really rethink the economy as being in service of people and planet and not in service of the minority. So I think we need to be a bit bolder about sort of really saying that what we're talking about here is reconfiguring the goals of systems, because a system does what a system does. And until you shift the goal, the system will continue to act in the way that it was set up. And if ever at this point in time when we see, the devastating geopolitical chaos, we see, as you say, stagflation, rising costs. We're at the brittle, sharp edge of the need to shift our system. So let's call out more broadly the need to shift the goals of the system. So thank you for that. We also have a question for you. So Leslie, can we find a different way to make sure funding from foundations is done in a more democratic way? That 2% of funding only going to climate is chilling.
Yes, it is scary. And again, 2% of a very small number to start with is even scarier. So I think this question raises a bigger issue around philanthropy, in that I think it's probably the only type of finance, because it is finance, that is not necessarily held to account. Yes, there's national jurisdictions that govern philanthropy in every country, but when it comes to actually being accountable for how the money's used and for what results one has achieved, or being accountable for if you really mess up and you have a big failure, you don't have to share that. So I think there's a problem with the industry of philanthropy, and that we don't share our mistakes and we don't learn from each other, and we don't really feel accountable for, the broader public good that we want to create. So that needs to change. But yes, there is a need to get more of that money into climate, and also more of that money into grassroots organizations. I mean, this is the other thing, is philanthropy is very top heavy in terms of kind of global north, and we need change to come from the bottom and grassroots organizations. There are things out there. There is a international philanthropy commitment on climate, which we had signed. It's been signed by over 500 foundations. And what's interesting about that is it's saying we want to act on climate in 3 ways. 1, through our grant making, which is the normal way you think about. 2, through our operations, which, you need to walk the talk. And 3, through our endowments. And this is an area, I think, as well, that's very exciting because, first of all, you need coherence between the assets that fund your grant making and your grant making aims. And we're seeing more and more foundations aligning that. There's a great group called Confluence Philanthropy that's working on that. But second, you may have more impact on the investment side that you do on your grant making, so there is a need to bring that together. But I think, to the question, still a lot of work to do.
Great, thank you. And on that theme of investment, I'm also struck by how unaware many of us as citizens are about the fact that, if we are lucky enough to have pensions, what that amounts up to, it is trillions of dollars. And if we could all actually ask the question, where is my pension invested? If you have a question, or if you're lucky enough to have savings, where is that invested? Because I think probably that's a conversation that isn't happening. And if you could somehow influence those pension funds to then flow into climate adaptation and resilience, we're all then using our own leverage in the system. So I with that want to turn to Days. Days, thank you very much for joining us. Days has got this wonderful portfolio of activities, and I'll let her tell you more about that. But we've explored what business needs to do differently. We've talked about philanthropy. Obviously moved us on to the power of individuals. But Days, when you think about individuals, broader civil society, both working alone but working across systems, what's your big dream for what might need to be happening differently?
Wow, I think my big dream is that we should all be taking action, and that we should all be taking action in various different fields. I feel quite lucky, actually, because I tend to work around philanthropy, I tend to work in business, I work in politics, and I'm just an average person as well. So there is something quite magical about being able to kind of see the whole. And I think as citizens, we should be starting to see the whole, because that's when we can realize what's working and what's not working, and how do we kind of get our governments and democracies to kind of fall in line with what we think the people need and want, which is very important for the work that I do. Just to give a brief overview, I'm a climate justice activist. And I always say, when people ask me what's my job, I go, I don't really have a job. I just do everything that is aligned with climate justice. And I think there is something quite magical about that, especially as a citizen, to basically say, I am going to be active. I'm going to find the thing that I feel passionate about, and I'm going to make sure it connects with all the work that I do every day. And this is where it comes to kind of having that conversation about, what does it look like to have one foot in the system and one foot out of the system? I think you need to have both, and lots of people either pick one or the other. But the thing is, what we need to do is start to make them connect to each other. People who sit on both sides have to become the conduit for the conversation, having to hold it. So, the big business leaders that I work with, I take them into the primary schools that I work with too, so they can see each other. And when they make decisions, that's how they'll end up making decisions that are better, not just for society, but also for the environment. I think we've talked a lot about the holistic aspect of this crisis. I feel like it's similar to Mara. I would actually rephrase it to the fact that it's not the climate that's the issue that's affecting all of this, but it's actually all of the issues that we have in the world that's created the climate crisis. And I think it could even actually work both ways. There is something about watching the way that we've learned how to use and abuse each other, and how this has created the way that we have relationships with the earth. And if we actually find a way to address the way that we behave with one another, how we can prioritize the ways that we treat each other, how we can use love, duty, and care as like the intention of every action that we make while we're being active citizens, the whole world would change very quickly. And I always say, like, imagine if someone like Boris Johnson or Putin actually cared about love, duty, and care to themselves, to everyone, to the world. The things that we see today will not be happening. And this means that we need to take action as the people who hold the power in democracies to say enough's enough. And I think there is such beautiful aspects about, you know, like even in this really sad and dark times, it's the times where society is challenged the most. And seeing Ukraine come together to fight for what they love with that love, duty, and care for each other, themselves, and the world, I think it's magical, you know. And why don't we take this into all of our systems so we can really create the change that's necessary?
Brilliant. I love that. And I was just scribbling as you were talking, and I've just noticed I've written down power of the individual 3 times. So there's something, literally, I've just written it 3 times. But I think there's something there about really understanding our own personal agency and our positionality and the influence that we can have. And I really love also, you know, understanding your influence around this, you know, tripartite notion of love, duty, and care. And so my follow-up question, Days, is how do we help people see that power that everybody has, and how do we unlock that ability for people to exercise love, duty, and care? Because we're all capable of it, every single one of us. And obviously, you know, you've named 2 people that aren't doing a very good job at all at the moment. But how then do we, you know, help people feel that possibility and unlock that potential without entering into a crisis? Because clearly that's kind of the very disruptive and painful way of doing it. Any
Exactly. And I think, you know, in that breath, like, this is why I think we need to start addressing the climate crisis as soon as possible, because we don't want to have to wait till we're in the moment of, God, what's happening, for us to do something, you know. And I think there is something about, like, remembering the power of ourselves. The systems that we live within, as you said, Sally, they work for the people who have the power because they recognize they have the power. But what about the people who have the power that don't also recognize their own agency? You know, and I think that's kind of where, like, my work kind of focuses on. How do we get people from feeling downtrodden by the system to feeling like they can change the system? You know, and I was quite lucky that my evolution took place in grassroots movements, whether it was when I worked at Amnesty and I saw the power of writing one letter, and if all of us did it, how it can literally save someone from torture, or whether it's, you know, the power of basically standing up and saying, I'm going to rebel against my government, an Extinction Rebellion, and seeing people come together and protest and creating the visions for the future that they hope that they would have, you know. So there is so much in, like, that kind of, not just us coming as individuals, but us coming as individuals with understanding of our agency and using that as a collective to create the really big changes that we need. So I think the practical steps is just get doing, you know, and kind of have the softness with ourselves to be able to mess up, to be able to kind of figure it out. And I feel like if we do that, we can kind of put aside this idea of being the perfect person before we get out. And as it's been said before, we can take the learnings and share with one another and be collaborative in the ways that we're moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I particularly love the fact that you referenced creating, you didn't quite say it, but having this vision of what could be and working towards that, because we also need to remind ourselves the future isn't written. It really isn't, even though it will feel very dark in some parts of the world right now in our society. The future isn't written, and you can't predict the future. You can shift what you do on a daily basis, and actually you'll then change the course of history.
Exactly.
So what we experience today is a function of what we did yesterday. What we do today will decide tomorrow. And I just think we forget that sometimes. But last question to you, Days, before I open it up a little bit further. and it's fine if you don't, if nothing comes to mind, but if you've got a nice example of maybe something that you've been involved with or something that you're aware of where it's an example of a community really understanding their voice and agency, and and have been mobilized to find that voice and agency. If you've got a nice example there.
Yes, I do. I feel like I've got many examples, because once you get people who really find, what they care about, what their niche is, and how they can come together, community is very easy to build. I actually was so fortunate to spend some time with the Summertown Community Association, and that's in North London. And they, in essence, realize that they are in like this hot pocket of where they have so many privileged and high income areas around them, but they are the working class of that area. So for example, things like infrastructure around public transport and other means of transport that could help people who didn't have cars just wasn't there. So they came together and decided that they're going to do something about it and created this amazing association. They are tackling now, they're grown to tackling air pollution, tackling housing issues, tackling insulation, and really kind of taking ownership over, this is our community, this is our space. They've got great stuff, like for example, I think my favorite one was about they recognized there was a lot of unemployment happening in the area. So during the building of this association, they actually have quota for 80% of the staff from this association have to come from the community. So when they come, they're not just helping the community that they are, part of and serving, they're helping themselves as well. And seeing that interconnectivity of the work that you're doing and the community that's benefiting really changes that kind of like need and want to create something bigger, and like my own personal journey of, coming into activism as a very naive 18-year-old, and finding a community that could hold me in my grief and my sorrows about the world, but then also hold me in feeling like I had a voice as well, and pushing me to do those work, and kind of like making myself feel uncomfortable in order to find growth, was really, really important and very enriching. And I think that it's very possible for everyone else to kind of tap into their local communities, whether it's geographically or interest-based or even work-based, and kind of create those little communities that you guys can help each other with to kind of vision what the future could look like.
Great, thank you. And thank you for sharing that example. I mean, I think, what this conversation is also telling me is that, and you touched on it, Days, we have to be open to the role of multiple actors. So you talked about working across systems, and, I do think that sometimes it's too easy to sort of demonize particular actors and not really be clear enough that actually we need all actors to play a role. We haven't actually talked, though, about one important group of actors, and that is government. And I would just love to ask you all, from your own perspectives, your position in your systems, what do you want to see government do differently? If you were, if you were meeting with the UN Secretary General, so you could answer the question from the point of view of international governance structures, or you can answer from the point of view of national governance, maybe days more. Perhaps we don't want to do that here in the UK at the moment, there's reasons. But anyway, state government, obviously, actually personally for me, offers huge amounts. So regional government, very exciting developments there. But yeah, you could please answer from the perspective of international, national, regional, really local government. But for the three of you, and I'll just go in the order that we went before, what would you like to see from government, Ma?
I would like to see like a deeper recognition of this, that the intersection between climate and health, and how how the action needs to be driven to really ensure that health is taken into account from the top level to the down level. And I think that we're starting to see a little bit of it, but I think that that could be a really important driver for action. I think that's one of the main things I'd like to see.
So governments, in other words, recognizing again that interconnectivity, and not typically is something we see, because we see separate silo departments for a whole range of issues. So joining up across systems, yeah, I think that would definitely help. Leslie, what would your ask of government be?
Oh, I love this question. So I would ask two things. And the first thing I would ask government to level the playing field, get rid of sovereign debt in the Global South. Because if you get rid of that, then we actually have a chance at having governments in the Global South join with other governments to help with the adaptation of the climate crisis. So that's more of a duty. The second thing I would say is really encourage policymakers to step up and be innovative. And in this, I'm really inspired by the work of Mariana Mazzucato. She's one of our partners. She has this whole theory around mission-based approaches. And she rightfully asked, why is it that we expect our governments to be kind of the lender of last resorts, the risk mitigators, and they come and save us when we screw things up really badly? They should be more than that. They should be the innovators. They should bring ideas to the table. They should co-invest. And they do co-invest in things, but then they usually don't get the return from that co-investment. So I think there is a role for government to really be part of the solution. It's hard right now because the election cycle makes it difficult to be a risk taker. But there are organizations like Apolitical that are working on this and really trying to bring innovation back into policymaking.
Yeah. And I think I may not have mentioned, but the conversation that we're having right now, we actually had as part of a in-person event in New York, and we had the executive director of the climate unit within the New Jersey government, and she was extraordinary. She talked about working private public sector in New Jersey to sort of turbocharge green innovation. And honestly, it was just one of the most inspiring stories from someone in the heart of government, driving that innovation. So it is there. We just don't tend to hear or see about it enough. So Days, same question to you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Sally. I feel like, weirdly enough, the innovation, at least from my point of view, is on the regional, it's on the local, it's even on the international. Like we talk about the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He's been very serious about climate action, even to the point of where it's actually kind of scary because he himself is the activist. I think he said something a couple of weeks ago that everyone loved, where it's like the activists aren't crazy. It's actually the people who aren't doing anything who are the crazy ones in this situation. And I think that's true. I think there is something really beautiful about kind of having that connection from the top to bottom, but then also there is, like, in the sovereignty ladder, or where we might see it is like the actual people. Where do we sit within this structure? And when I'm thinking about democracy, and the democracy that I learned about, it's all about literal meaning. It's people power. So where do we play in as an active citizenship to basically guide our governments? And how can we make sure it's not the other way around? Because when it's the other way around, that's when we start to see things spiraling out of control, where there's no measures of accountability for the actions that they take, and therefore they tend to think more short term. They tend to think of what's going to work now rather than what's going to work for this generation, the next generation, and generations to come after that. And I think I do echo about being risky as well, because we won't be able to amend the systems that we're in now because they are corrupt. They were never built for all of us. What we do is we need to have the bold hope to vision for so much more. I personally love the idea of cancelling debt for the Global South. And I think we should even take it further and consider loss and damages for what's already happening, for the things that we can't take back. And I also am a strong believer in degrowth economics, about learning how to live in a smaller way that may even actually change and revolutionize the way that we live our lives in general, to actually look for hope and joy and love in our lives rather than finance and resource. And I think there is a way that we can have it all, and that's what I'm hoping for.
Great. I'm just checking. Thank you, the live stream, and thank you, Dan Benner, for being so active. I love the phrase, yes, making the impossible possible. I think that's what we're talking a lot about here today. And yeah, also talking to the fact that governments often do create really compelling policy frameworks, but then the capability to deliver often isn't there, which is why, Leslie, I think the work of Apolitical is really important, to sort of strengthen that ability to deliver. So for those of you that are listening, if you've got any questions, please post them on the live stream. But I guess just to sort of round out this discussion, and I have to confess, I feel heartened by this discussion. I'm feeling a little fillip of joy and hope, which, yeah, it's hard to come by at the moment. And, you know, I think there's so much in this conversation about what we can take forward, and particularly Days, that last comment, and Leslie, you talked about it too, which is how do we strengthen accountability? So philanthropy at the moment, not very accountable. Governments at the moment, not in any way accountable to future generations. And that's a really big miss. So, you know, how do we pull that lever of accountability as well to kind of create that deep systemic transformation is something I'm sitting here pondering. But my last question to you all is, and I did ask this in London, so hopefully no great surprise. I'd love to know from the three of you, and then I'll hand it back to the Globespan organisers. What's the thing that gives you most hope right now? And I ask that question because we are in deeply troubled territories. The turbulence around us is intensifying. I remember about 10 years ago speaking to somebody in business and talking about the VUCA world, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And I just thought, nah, that's not going to happen. And well, here we are, 2 years into this decisive decade where we know that we've got such a short window to respond to the climate crisis, respond to inequality in a way that changes the outlook. And we're trying to make these big decisions, deliver these big ambitions against an incredibly volatile and turbulent background. And so sometimes it's hard to find hope. You know, definitely there are moments where it feels pretty hopeless. But I hope that anyone listening tonight will see that there are, or wherever you are in the world, it just happens to be nearly tonight here in the UK, I think there are causes for hope and optimism, mostly because the future isn't written. We are writing it as we speak. But I'd love to hear, Mar, Leslie, then Days, what gives you the most cause for hope, Mar?
Thank you. And I've been thinking about it since last time you asked it. So I think for me, the two things, it's action. And I know that there's not enough action, and it's, you know, it's not fast enough. I know that, but I think that when I'm having a really bad day, I just look at, you know, how far we've come and how mainstream this conversation is compared to, you know, even 5 years ago. So the fact that, you know, the board level, my company, that really discussing this and willing to know more, I think that that's, you know, a reason for hope. And then the second one is people. It's all about, you know, how people are pushing and how people are speaking up. I think that is really encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, I think there has been a step change and a sea change in corporate attitudes to this agenda. And I agree. I think it's been over the last 5 years. Okay, one reason to be hopeful. Leslie?
So I'm going to say something that sounds like a bad nightclub, but I think two things: money and women. And I say women because look at this amazing panel. More importantly, look at the amazing women that are making changes out there. Politicians, business leaders, thought leaders. It's incredible. So I am very optimistic that we as women leaders can change the world. And money, is really important. And I think, Dan, you said it in your comments, there is movement among big financial institutions, asset managers, pension funds, to really try to use the power of money to nudge and catalyze change. GFANZ was announced at COP, very exciting movement. Of course, more needs to be done, but the fact that those who control money, which is really the lifeblood of our economy, are starting to wake up to its power, it's really exciting. So I urge all of those that are in the financial services institutions to please think about the power of that euro or dollar and how that can be moved even faster.
Totally agree. Thank you very much. Days, what gives you the most hope?
I think this is an easy one for me. It's young people, especially children, because there is so much we can learn from children in the way that they see the world. Because they have kind of like people say naivety, but I say courage to hope for better than what they're experiencing, which is like insane. And when I'm feeling like I'm in this moment of kind of grief and anxiety, the first thing I do is go to the nature reserve I work at, and the kids there, and watching them in awe and wonder of the natural world, but then also the anger that they have and the passion that they have to fight for their futures. It's mesmerizing. And I feel like even if, God forbid, we don't end up using this next decade very well, and this next decade becomes a decade of inaction, I know that there is going to be a next generation who's going to be bustling and going to hopefully have the answers to fix things. And I truly believe that they are going to be the generation that holds us up.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing us so neatly back to the core principle of sustainable development, intergenerational equity. Again, we forget that sometimes. So the future of sustainability, it's there for the taking, it's there for the making, and there are reasons to feel that we can create the future we want. There are huge resisting forces that are active and strong. But actually, I think if we also focus on the activating forces for change, and we have 3 of them on the call today, then maybe this will be the decade of action, because it really needs to be. So thank you all. We're at time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Days. Wonderful to have this conversation again. It was different. How lovely. And I'm going to hand back to Glowscan. And thank you for inviting us to participate today. We appreciate the opportunity.